The sheriff slammed his hand on the hood of his cruiser. This sign, the clubhouse, the whole neighborhood. He tapped the plat map with his pen. It's all on Mr. Walker's land. Lydia Bramwell, the HOA president, choked out. What do you mean his land? I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the tension build. My name is Noah Walker. 2 months ago, I inherited 1,000 acres of ranch land, and as of this morning, you're all trespassing on it. Lydia's face went white. The crowd shifted nervously. And then with a smile, I added, oh, and I haven't even started with the eviction options yet. Lydia Bramwell was the kind of woman who looked like she owned the world, even when she didn't. She had that air about her, cold, calculating, like every interaction was a power play. When I first met her, it wasn't with a friendly handshake or an introduction. No, she handed me a bright yellow violation notice, crisp and official, like she was doing me a favor. Your cattle are too close to the walking trail, she said, her tone dripping with that faux sweetness. And the grass, Noah? It's over 4.5 inches tall. That's a violation of community standards. I glanced around at the land I'd inherited, 1,000 acres of ranch, scrub, and creek. My property. This is my land, Lydia. I don't live in your HOA. Her smile didn't falter, but I saw the flicker of annoyance behind her eyes. Well, you're affecting property values, and that makes it our business. It was clear then she wasn't just trying to enforce rules. Lydia saw me as an obstacle to be dealt with, a threat to her control over Cedar Ridge. And that was the moment I realized I was no longer just a neighbor to her. I was prey. When I inherited my Uncle Hank's ranch, I thought I was getting a quiet retreat, a break from city life. I had lived in the city for years, a software guy who valued his privacy and routine. The idea of 1,000 acres of land to call my own seemed like a perfect change of pace. I imagined fixing fences, enjoying the outdoors, and maybe raising a few cattle. But Cedar Ridge Estates wasn't part of the deal. I first saw the neighborhood from the hilltop above my ranch. Cedar Ridge was like an uninvited guest who had overstayed its welcome. Gated, pristine, and very much in the way. It looked like a cookie-cutter community, complete with beige McMansions and matching mailboxes. At the stone entrance stood the Welcome to Cedar Ridge sign, boasting luxury living and deed restrictions. It was supposed to be an exclusive, peaceful enclave, but it was built right in the middle of my land. I didn't know the full history until later. My uncle had signed a ground lease agreement with the developer 25 years ago, allowing the HOA to manage the subdivision, while the land itself remained in my family's name. They didn't own it, they rented it. The lease had expired over a year ago, and no one had bothered to renew it. This wasn't just a neighbor dispute. I had inherited the land underneath Cedar Ridge, and with it, the right to renegotiate, the lease raise, rent, or even terminate their right to occupy it. I didn't want drama. My plan was simple: live quietly on the ranch, avoid the HOA, and let them manage the neighborhood. But Lydia Bramwell, the HOA president, had other plans. She wasted no time making it clear that I wasn't welcome. The violation notices started piling up. My livestock trailer was too visible, my grass too tall, and my cattle too close to the walking trail. Her attitude was clear. Cedar Ridge was her kingdom, and she expected everyone, including me, to follow her rules. I tried to reason with her, but Lydia wasn't interested in negotiation. She treated me like a tenant on land I owned. It wasn't long before I realized that Lydia wasn't going to let up, and that's when I decided I had to remind her who the actual landlord was. The first warning signs were small, almost insignificant. A violation notice here, a passive-aggressive call there. It was Lydia Bramwell, the HOA president, trying to assert control. The first letter was about my cattle being too close to the walking trail, despite the fact that the trail was far from my land. Then came complaints about the height of my grass and how my livestock trailer disrupted the visual harmony of Cedar Ridge. The letters felt like jabs, nothing huge, but enough to let me know Lydia was paying attention. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. I began to notice Lydia driving past my property more frequently, eyes fixed on my ranch. I had no proof, but it felt like she was watching me. Then one day, I caught her standing on the boundary of my land, her phone in hand, snapping pictures of my fence. I had a right to feel violated, but I kept my cool. This was Lydia's game: subtle harassment, passive-aggressive behavior, and attempts to wear me down. But at that point, it was still just annoying, not yet serious. The harassment escalated quickly after that. It wasn't just notes anymore, it was direct interference. One afternoon while I was inspecting my fence, I saw Lydia again. This time she was actually stepping onto my property camera, in hand snapping pictures of my barn. I approached her, trying to keep my temper in check. "You're trespassing," I said, pointing at the boundary markers. She smiled like I was overreacting. "I'm just making sure everything's up to code," she said sweetly, acting like she had every right to be there. I was furious, but I didn't lose my cool. Instead, I calmly told her that my land was off limits, but that didn't stop her. A few days later, I received a letter this time accusing me of violating HOA rules because my livestock trailer was visible from the neighborhood. The letter demanded that I move it immediately. I was done. It was clear Lydia wasn't trying to enforce rules anymore. She was trying to control everything about my land, about my life. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. Later, I found out she'd been regularly entering the area at the edge of my property to take photos of my operations, documenting everything. She was treating my ranch like her personal project, and I wasn't having it. Then the real damage started. One morning I went to check my mailbox, and I found it destroyed, smashed into pieces like someone had run it over. I tried to stay calm, but it was hard. The tire tracks in the dirt were fresh, leading straight to my gate. I couldn't prove it was Lydia, but it wasn't hard to figure out who was behind it. Things got worse from there. A few days later, I discovered my security cameras had been ripped off their mounts, wires hanging loose in the wind. Someone had tampered with my equipment. The message was clear. Lydia didn't want me documenting what was happening. She wanted to make sure I couldn't prove she was crossing boundaries. The final straw came when I found my truck tampered with my tires, slashed oil drained. This wasn't just petty vandalism. It was sabotage. It was as if Lydia was actively trying to cripple my ability to function. I had to face the truth. Lydia wasn't just being a nuisance anymore. She was trying to destroy my livelihood, make it impossible for me to live and work on my land. It wasn't just harassment, it was outright hostility. I tried to ignore it, hoping it would stop. But then the sheriff showed up. A deputy rolled up while I was inspecting the fence lines, telling me that they'd received reports of a suspicious person near the Cedar Ridge Greenbelt. I pointed to the markers on my property line. "That's my land," I said. "This is all mine. Cedar Ridge is renting from me." The deputy glanced at the plat map I handed him, clearly skeptical. "I get it. But Lydia's still claiming it's HOA land. She insists you're trespassing." The deputy made a call to Lydia. When he came back, he seemed frustrated. "She's wrong. It's your land, not theirs. But I'd suggest you get everything in order. She's not going to stop." I could see it in his eyes. He didn't want to get involved in HOA drama. But Lydia wasn't going away. The sheriff had just confirmed what I already knew. Lydia was out of control. And this wasn't just some petty dispute anymore. It was escalating to the point where even local authorities were getting caught in the middle. I knew things had gone too far when Lydia filed a bogus complaint with the county accusing me of trespassing on community property. The complaint was completely false, but she didn't care. She was going after me in any way she could. And that's when I got the letter from her lawyer demanding that I remove all my equipment from the property or face eviction. I'd had enough. This wasn't just about nuisance complaints anymore. Lydia had crossed the line into personal, deliberate attacks. She wasn't just making my life difficult. She was trying to force me off my land. It was no longer about enforcing rules. It was about power, control, and forcing me out. That was the turning point. I knew I had to fight back. This wasn't going to stop until I made it clear that I wasn't backing down. I contacted my lawyer, prepared the documents, and braced myself for the battle that was coming. Lydia had underestimated me, and now I was going to show her exactly who the real landowner was. The day of the mandatory HOA meeting felt more like a showdown than a neighborhood discussion. The room was packed with residents, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Lydia stood at the front, clutching her notes, trying to maintain an air of authority. I sat in the back, my lawyer beside me, both of us calmly watching the chaos unfold. Lydia wasted no time launching into her usual spiel, claiming that I was attempting to steal the neighborhood and that my actions were threatening the stability of Cedar Ridge. She tried to frame me as the villain, an outsider trying to disrupt their peaceful existence, but the crowd wasn't buying it. Lydia's usual charm and manipulation were starting to wear thin. One of the residents stood up, raising his hand. "Lydia, you knew about the lease, didn't you?" he asked, his voice sharp. Lydia faltered for a moment, then quickly recovered. "The lease is irrelevant," she snapped. "It's just some old paperwork, nothing to worry about." The crowd murmured, and I could feel the shift in the room. Lydia had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the power of the truth. She had been feeding the homeowners lies for years, hiding the facts about the land, and now it was coming back to bite her. That's when my lawyer stood up calm and composed and placed a large blow-up map on the easel. "Actually, Lydia, the lease is very relevant," he said. "As you know, the original ground lease with Mr. Walker's uncle expired last year, which means Mr. Walker is now the rightful owner of the land beneath Cedar Ridge." A collective gasp swept through the room as the residents began to process the truth. My lawyer then dropped the real bombshell, emails, photos, and documents from the original developer, showing that Lydia and the HOA board had known about the expired lease for months, yet they continued to mislead the homeowners into believing they owned the land. This, my lawyer said, holding up a thick file of evidence, is proof that the HOA has been withholding critical information from you all. And as of today, Mr. Walker has every legal right to renegotiate the terms of the lease or terminate it altogether. The room went silent, the realization sinking in. Lydia tried to speak, but her words were lost in the stunned faces of the residents. They had been betrayed by the very person they trusted to lead them. Lydia's composure shattered as the truth came crashing down. Her usual confident tone turned desperate. "This is absurd," she exclaimed, her voice cracking. "You're ruining everything. This is about the stability of our community." But the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. A few residents began standing up one by one. "You knew about the lease, didn't you, Lydia?" a man asked, his voice steady. "And you didn't tell us?" Lydia's face flushed, but she couldn't hide the panic in her eyes. "It's just paperwork. It doesn't matter," she shot back, but the damage was done. The room was no longer with her. A woman stood and waved a folder in front of the crowd. "I've got proof," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Emails from Lydia, meeting minutes. She knew about the lease, and she kept us in the dark." The room went dead silent. Lydia's knees seemed to buckle, and she struggled to maintain her composure. The evidence was irrefutable. Her lies were exposed, and she had nowhere to hide. The relief in the room was palpable. Residents stood up talking among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others exchanging looks of vindication. Lydia's control over Cedar Ridge had crumbled, and in her place there was a renewed sense of freedom among the homeowners. For the first time in years, they weren't afraid of the next violation notice or Lydia's petty rules. I felt a wave of emotion as I watched the residents gather in small groups talking about what to do next. The sense of unity was overwhelming. The HOA's grip on the community had been broken, and now they had the power to shape their future without fear. For the first time, I felt like I was part of something bigger than just owning land. I wasn't just fighting for my property, I was fighting for their right to live freely, without the constant overreach of an HOA president who didn't care about anything but her own power. The aftermath of the meeting wasn't just emotional. Legal consequences were soon to follow. The State Real Estate Commission began investigating Lydia for withholding critical land use information from homeowners. Her actions had breached her fiduciary duty as HOA president, and the repercussions were severe. Meanwhile, the homeowners filed complaints, and the HOA was officially dissolved. The remaining board members were either replaced or resigned, unwilling to carry the weight of Lydia's lies. Cedar Ridge was no longer an HOA-controlled prison. Residents now had a choice: they could opt into a new agreement for maintenance, or they could handle it themselves. As for Lydia, she wasn't let off the hook. The financial settlements came swiftly. The homeowners filed a civil lawsuit for the fines they'd unfairly paid over the years. In the end, Lydia had to pay back $53, 0 inches restitution to the homeowners for the improper fines and the misinformation she'd spread. The legal fees, the penalties, and the damage to her reputation were enough to ensure she would never hold power again. The ultimate karma came when Lydia tried to salvage some of her power. In a final ironic twist, she attempted to buy the old HOA clubhouse and pool, hoping to turn it into a private club. But the new interim president, a woman named Janet, had different ideas. "We don't need an HOA anymore," Janet told me over the phone. "We voted to dissolve it, and we want the pool and clubhouse open to everyone in the county at a fair price. We're done with Lydia's vision." I bought the clubhouse and pool for a token amount, a fraction of what Lydia had spent building it. But instead of keeping it as a private HOA amenity, I opened it up as the Walker Ranch Community Center and public pool. Memberships were cheap, $10 a month, open to anyone in the county. Cedar Ridge residents got a discount, but they no longer controlled who used it. For the first time, the neighborhood wasn't a fortress for a select few. It was a community for everyone. The first time Lydia saw a line of trucks from outside the neighborhood parked by her old clubhouse, her face was priceless. The power she'd clung to for so long had slipped through her fingers, and now she had to watch as the very thing she used to control was open to the public. As for me, I found peace. The ranch was mine again. The land was mine, and Cedar Ridge was no longer a thorn in my side. The neighborhood had been transformed. It wasn't just about getting rid of Lydia, it was about creating a place where people could live freely without the constant fear of arbitrary fines and rules. I could breathe easy again knowing the battle was over. The last time I saw Lydia, she was standing on the edge of the now public pool, staring at the rows of trucks parked outside. Her face was a mix of disbelief and anger, but she couldn't do anything about it anymore. The game was over. And, as I looked out over the land that I'd fought so hard to keep, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for me and for the community that had once been under Lydia's thumb. The ranch was mine, and it always would be.